think it's that. Great. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so now we will be transitioning into our panel, and it really is a pleasure for me to introduce our panelists today. So our panelists are Christopher Mejia Argueta, who is a research scientist at the Center for Transportation and Logistics at MIT, and also the director of the Scale Network for Latin America. And we also have Marcelo Olivares. Marcelo is a full professor in the School of Economics and Business at the University of Chile. Marcelo also serves as a DE, Manufacturing and Service Operations Management, so one of the top journals in the field. And I think we're looking forward to a very insightful discussion today. So I've prepared a set of questions for both Chris and Marcelo. But before going there, Chris and Marcelo will do a quick round of introduction, tell us a little bit about themselves and their research. After which, then I will ask some questions. Please feel free to add any questions that you might have in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat continuously to also bring your questions to our panelists. So without further ado, let me start by introducing Chris and giving you the floor for your introduction. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Rafa. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on the part of the world that you are at. So as mentioned by Rafa, so I have been developing some work with my group for a while regarding the impact research in Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly in supply chain management and operation management on different topics. So, but before we jump in there, I'm gonna share like just a few slides to position some of the points here. And I'm gonna be taking my own time just to avoid going over time, but it's really an honor to be here. So going to the point, so let me start from who I am, because I think that at the end it's also important for you to know like how I establish these ideas around the research that I do, besides the fancy title I have at the moment at MIT. So I was born in a middle-class family, and I learned to earn 1 peso thanks to my parents' education. So my parents own a poultry store located in the central part of Mexico, exactly the one that you see here. Let me use the laser pointer. And in this location, that's actually where the magic started. So I got in touch with, like nano, small, and micro businesses, and I started, like understanding how difficult it is to connect with people. My parents who actually grew me on this, my parents are, this is my mom, this is my dad, this is my son, my first son, now I have two. So I just started, like actually understanding what is the complexity of all of this. And why is this important? So I learned probably 3 important points, or probably 4. First, that nano and micro firms rule the game, particularly at the neighborhood level. Second, trust and familiarity matter to do business at this level. Third, and actually fourth as well, is the cash is king, but I would say that freshness is queen, okay? Particularly in this environment where people would like to have, high quality products at a level, that they can pay for, something that is affordable to them. So then what is the problem here? So because at the end, what we are trying to solve is, I would say, more than an elephant is a hydra. I think that this has like many different heads that we need to start addressing in emerging market economies. And then I'm going to cite a few. So the most difficult one, I would say, is understand a little bit the dynamic consumer behavior. And this affects everyone in energy, in mining, in, like in the daily life as well. But on the other hand, we have something that is a consequence of this dynamic behavior, even if it's e-commerce, even if it's in the like the brick and mortar. So we need to face the consequences by having commercial fragmentation. And this is not only from the commercial perspective, it's also affecting the supply chains. They are quite diverse. Sometimes they are informal. We have to face all of that thanks to, this dynamic behavior that we need to serve somehow. However, what actually creates kind of a bottleneck there, and is kind of the biggest issue, is the low technology adoption. By the way, this is different in Latin America with respect to other markets. You would be surprised, but based on some research that I have done with a few colleagues from South Africa and like the central part of of Africa, their level of technology is higher sometimes than the level of technology adoption that we have in Latam. And using basic cell phones, sometimes we think about we need to use a sophisticated app. Well, sometimes it's not the case. We need to go beyond that and actually realize that with simple SMS messages, that's something that transactions can be helped upon to move forward and make logistics and operation management like more aligned. The next one is something that is very, like difficult because it depends on the big elephant in the room that I would say that is the government, and is the poor infrastructure and the poor logistics public policy making. Most of the decisions that are made are not necessarily made based on data, based on models, and therefore this might create some potential undesired consequences down the line. And therefore, this might create big issues afterwards for the rest of the ecosystem that I have mentioned before. But for me, if you ask me, okay, but what is, like the biggest issue that you see? I think it's this one: distrust all over the system and the poor long-term strategy that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean. Most of the times we tend to think like not only from the political perspective or the public sector or the private sector perspective, we think about like the short term as the main reward, when actually it shouldn't be. We need to address it in other way, and that's something that we need to keep changing and make like bigger efforts on this. But this one is behavioral, so there are many changes that need to happen. So how we are addressing this in the laboratory that I founded at MIT. So I'm coming, from this background where actually Professor Jean-François, who is present here, and probably he will talk about it, and also Rafael, we have developed plenty of studies in the retail sector, with what we call the nanostores. However, I thought that particularly thinking on the main challenges that many of these vulnerable segments have, food malnutrition, food waste is something that you see every day. So that's why we are working on agri-food models to provide more accessibility, more affordability, and more availability of the products. But something that I realized when I started working on that perspective in what is used to be called the MIT Food and Retail Operations Lab, that is the predecessor of this laboratory, is that this is multifactorial. And you can look at this problem from different angles: the nutrition angle, the agroeconomics angle, and I can continue, right? Innovation sciences angle. So there are many things that we need to think about. But if we think about the global South hemisphere, there are other commodities that we also need to pay attention to: mining, energy, and this kind of first mile challenge is something that we need to start, like to pay attention to in order to connect better the global South hemisphere. And how we do that? Well, we do it through global and cross-border transportation. That is one of the biggest challenges that we face at the moment. And last but not least, we pioneered this crazy idea. We started working on something that we call logistics public policy making, or infrastructure, transportation, and logistics public policy, in order to make sure that we help, policymakers on how to do better decisions. And of course, all the techniques are horizontal to that. So that's kind of what we are addressing, how we are addressing it. And then, yeah, that's my introduction, Rafa. So coming back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. So now we will turn over to our second panelist, Marcelo. So please, Marcelo, take it away.
Thank you. I'm sharing screen. Let me know if you can see it correctly. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Well, just thank you first of all. This is a great initiative. I'm really it's an honor to be able to present here. So I am from Latin America. I am originally from Chile. Here's a kind of brief history of my academic career. I went to the US in 2002 to start my PhD, and then after that, I became a professor at Columbia Business School until 2012. And then there was a big decision to come back to Chile at that time, which was a great decision retrospectively, but of course, at that time it was a difficult one. When I came back, I joined first the industrial engineering department at the University of Chile, and last year I moved to the business school at the same university. Okay. So, since I have to say I have a particular attraction to applied research. I like to do my research in collaboration with other institutions, and I've collaborated both with the private sector and the public sector. Within the private sector, I've done some work with the retail industry, working both with large retail chains, but also with startups, with sort of tech companies that are providing services to large retailers and help them develop and sort of develop their technology. I've also done some work with healthcare institutions and digital platforms. But I would say most of especially my recent work, has been focused with the public sector. So I've been doing for several years work in procurement, in public procurement, here collaborating both with the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Education, and looking other areas where to work with. And during the COVID crisis, there was something very special. We had the opportunity to collaborate with the Ministry of Health in Chile to guide them in using data and analytics to sort of provide solutions, different solutions to the COVID crisis. We won the Franz Edelman Prize in 2022 for that work. And I've been doing also work in other areas, kind of smaller projects. So procurement is one of the areas I'm working intensively today, and I've been working for several years. And so, first of all, I think it's a highly overlooked area. Like, 13 to 20% of the world GDP is government procurement. And if you look at the amount of research we do in this area, it's really underdeveloped, in my opinion. Also, and here comes the Latin American context. Public procurement is typically subject to large inefficiencies. Corruption is a big deal in Latin America. There's even like a Netflix series about corruption in procurement markets in different countries, in the mechanism. So when something is in Netflix, you realize it must be an important problem to work with. And I think in addition to that, it's a satisfactory area to work in the sense that you're also having social impact. A lot of the public services that are provided to the vulnerable populations have some aspect of procurement into it. I've been working in school food programs. Now I'm also working in the delivery of medical drugs. So I think it's an area where you also feel the impact matters. Finally, I think the design of this public procurement system matters. So the details matter, and that's where I think we have an opportunity to bring our research and our sort of more technical knowledge to actually create more sophisticated solutions that create value. Okay. There's pros and cons working with the government, and in particular in the area of public procurement. I think for procurement, one of the advantages is that it tends to be a multidiscipline area. So you have to use economics, operations, computer science, behavioral sciences to actually create kind of holistic solutions. And that's something I like particularly. You have to combine analytical modeling with data and empirical research. That's also something I like to do. We typically can work with public data. And so if in terms of facilitating the replication of our research, this is also something attractive. And as I said before, I see there's a lot of like low-hanging fruits here. Like you can do small changes that can have big impact. And so impactful research would be something that this type of research line facilitates. In terms of challenges, it's political. So making changes requires additional skills sort of to guide you through the whole political infrastructure. Testing and piloting studies can take a long time. So some of my projects have taken 6 years until we get a paper out of it. So yeah, you need to be patient. And the other part is like government turnover sometimes creates difficulties to your projects. You have one collaborator, and this typically change from governments to the next, and that also adds some frictions to the work you do. But otherwise, I feel the pros are more than the cons, and so this is an area I wish to continue working in the future. So I'll finish my presentation there. I'll leave it to you, Rafael, to continue.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marcelo. Perhaps you can stop sharing the screen
Yes.
so we can all see each other. And now we will transition into the second part of the session where I will be asking a few questions. So, of course, this panel is in the area of impactful research in Latin America. So, as part of this webinar in contemporary operations in developing economies, this year we wanted to focus a little bit more on the Latin American context. And so, Chris and Marcelo already gave us a flavor for a wide range of different topics of interest. So what I wanted to ask you is, so building on this initial presentation that you've made about those opportunities, what would you highlight as kind of unique aspects, unique in terms of maybe potential for contribution, both academically and practically, from research that emanates from this Latin American context? So what is it about the Latin American context that can be, a powerful source of insight? Perhaps you can share a few insights with us.
Marcelo, would you like to go first?
I'll go first. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. So, well, I'm not sure how much of these are unique of Latin America, whereas they could also be thought about as most developing countries. But I think what happens is that typically we have limited advanced human capital. And so there's a need to sort of provide this human capital in different ways. When we had the COVID crisis in Chile, they realized they had huge amounts of data and they didn't have the capabilities of working with that. So they go to the universities, and that's an opportunity for us to be able. You have to be open, right, to do that type of collaborations, right? It's probably going to be harder to conduct research in those terms, but you have to invest, right? You have to invest in these collaborations to work. But that's an advantage, I think. It's an advantage, quote unquote, the fact that because we know there's a need for human capital, part of this human capital is now sort of generated at the universities, and so we have a good reputation for providing these more advanced solutions. Both, I would say, with the government and with the private sector. This also happens in the private sector, and I'm seeing it, working with startups and some of the larger retailers. In Latin America, we don't have the data science groups that we have at Amazon, at Facebook, and others. And so, but a way to build them is working in collaboration with academia. And I think it's happening, right? So I work with a student on a project, and that student then actually goes to work with a company, and you feel that there's some sort of transfer and building up this human capital, which creates an opportunity.
Yeah. Rafael, can I ask a question?
Please, of course.
And I know that you're very meticulous and you have a bunch of great questions. Just very, very quick, Marcelo, Chris, a question from me. I'm also very much interested in working on developing operations. And I found that it is very difficult sometimes with working with, the governments or even commercial entities in developing countries. How easy or difficult it is to work with, governmental or commercial entities in Latin America based on your experience? How open they are?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a great point.
Yeah.
I think finding the collaborator, it's a big part of the work.
Yeah.
And you have to find somebody that has some power to make changes in the organization, but at the same time that truly believes in this academic collaboration. Otherwise, it's very hard, right? So you typically don't find that many. But if you find a couple, it's a success. But it's true. Like I've done several projects where things fail because I didn't find the right person to work with.
Yeah, I echo that. You need to find champions, in the corresponding organizations that you want to tap into. And they need to be able not only to buy the ticket, okay, but actually enjoy the ride together with you so that they can become, cross-pollinate this and spread the word. Once you find that type of formula where this person becomes, like a kind of a promoter, of the work, it's gonna help a lot. something that I have seen, and this is part of the challenges that I foresee that is also promising, is part of what I would call promising, is that in the past, I don't think that the experiences with academia, between academia, private academia, and public sectors, was the best, I would say, But I think that, as mentioned by Marcelo, now there is more openness on their side. They have realized that, I think that Marcelo pointed out very well, like they won't be able to get like these sophisticated teams that they see in world-class companies, but they are now looking at academia as one of these potential source of talent, But now it comes the question like how we are able to build a long-term relationship that is organic for both sides, and we are able to grow together, Coming back to what I was telling you, I think that once you have the champion, you need to create a roadmap and like design something that is going to be long-term sustainable for both parties. And in between, you will need to start developing their people and your own people there, to create this kind of bridging part. On their side, they are going to be putting some blocks to build that bridge, to get closer to academia. So probably they are going to be sending some potential students to the programs of all the amazing people that we have in this room. And on the other side, you need to start actually closing the gap from the practical perspective. We need to build something that a Harvard article at Harvard Business Review used to call translators. We need to have translators on both sides. So that would be like the way to pass from the buying ticket to enjoying the ride, and not one ride, multiple rides, like a roller coaster, Yeah, that would be my take. And if you allow me, Rafa, I would like to interject here to just mention probably a couple of promising areas that I see as well in LATAM. I would say capacity building for the region is very important, particularly now that we are facing a lot of uncertainty, not only in LATAM, everywhere, right? But I tend to think about this at two different levels. The micro level, in which case we need to consider how these nano, micro, small businesses, but also their owners, helpers, staff working there can, like close the gap and start, like making better decisions. And this goes beyond, like the infrastructure and everything else. That's kind of secondary. They need to start, like developing their competences. From the macro level, the macro perspective, the companies and the governments need to start also try to think about how they can use data and model-driven perspectives to make better decisions too, at a higher level, to benefit, the regions, the municipalities, the countries, and of course, this will allow us, like to close the gap also on what I call the human talent evolution, because it's not that everything is about technology and the assets that a company or a government might have, or the infrastructure that a country might have too. It's also about how the people will be able to use them. And unless we close that gap, we will be able to face and address big social issues like healthcare accessibility, that Marcelo has worked a lot on that. I'm working more on the food malnutrition and food, like safety components, and dealing with informality too. So I think that would be part of the deal, like how we connect all of these siloed, let's say, groups that we have, and how we connect them to the markets and across, like countries, etc.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. So my next question is kind of about the institutional structure in which these universities in Latin America operate. So could you tell us, what a prototypical OM group in a top university in Latin America looks like, and how does this group compare to other groups that you might have seen, for example, in the US and Europe?
What do you think, Marcelo? Go ahead.
I mean, first of all, what's defining a top OM group, right? So I think we could have different perspectives on that. Let me tell you my perspective. I think, first of all, it has to be, connected, right? It has to be part of the international work network, right? We have to think about, operations management as a it's a field with global presence, and so any top institution has to be connected with the international network, which is great. Which is one of the great initiatives like this help, right? But I also think like to have to sort of to use our advantage of being in a developing country in Latin America is to actually do research that has potential for impact, right? So look for avenues to do more applied work. And this means you could do analytical work, but that is motivated by real problems and that they provide insights to practitioners, or working directly with data and actually come up with solutions. The other one I think is the students, and this is something I've always tell my students. It's one of the great contributions we do here is forming future professionals. Future professionals that will work in industry and will bring some of these advanced analytics tools into the industry. Eventually, they come back to us, right? Because they later seek our help to work in more challenging problems, but also forming future academics. And I think that's a big part of what we do at a top group. It's actually thinking about the future generations, both in the industry and in academia. Maybe another particular factor from Latin America, in my opinion, is English. English is not as well developed as in other countries. And if you want to sort of build sort of the future generations, we have to make sure our English improves all across the board. And so I'm trying to combine now sort of giving my classes both in Spanish and in English, and really pushing hard for students to improve their language skills. I would think that's something specifically to Latin America that we should push forward, and having these international collaborations help in that matter as well.
Yeah, I fully agree with Marcelo. And actually, probably something that I will address here is that in Latin American universities, all the colleagues are, like immensely capable, of doing things, making a difference, despite they might be smaller groups compared to, like what we see in other locations around the world. I think that I need to emphasize that. And this is because of the passion and the, like the real commitment that they show. And that's something that can be a big benefit for whoever plans to, like enter into the Latin American research community, Of course, you will need to develop, like trust with them, etc. But we are very easygoing. I would say that it would be easier, The other probably thing that I see the most is that, and Marcelo actually addressed this in one of his slides, most of the OM groups that you see in Latin America, I would say that they are management, finance, behavioral science oriented, with a little bit of computer science and a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But something that I have perceived, and this is not for everyone, okay, but there is some focus on teaching, okay? This happens everywhere, but I would say that in certain countries in LATAM, something that I have seen is that there is a heavy focus on teaching. So you think about it, research and teaching are like competing for the same time. That is researchers' time. So it becomes a little bit harder to justify or develop, like high impact research. You don't have the time to do it. And the only way to justify that is that you are bringing funding. But if funding is not available, so it becomes some kind of a vicious circle, So what can happen there, and is part of the solution, because I would like also to address, like the potential solution. I think that thinking about funding coming from other countries, non-LATAM countries, this interdisciplinarity and this, like funding availability can support many of the development of these research strategies. And as mentioned by Marcelo, this can connect directly to the field research, Is it cheap to develop field research? No, it's not. It's very costly. But if through this human talent that Marcelo described as the students, that can be, as mentioned by him, split in different categories, perhaps there is something that you can develop there, And at the end, it's everything comes back to the design of what you want to get out of it. It's just the data is to develop the people in order to become researchers in the future. So yeah, but at the end is kind of what I could how I would address, like the issues there.
So perhaps one opportunity is, you've highlighted how Latin American universities have access to this unique context, can form these relationships, also because it is not only a problem for the universities themselves, but I guess also for the companies and the governments that English proficiency may not be very high, right? And so I think there is potential to act as a link, right, for OEM groups in Latin America to act as a link to this unique context, and perhaps what researchers in developed countries can contribute is that focus on deep, high quality research, right? So perhaps there's some interesting opportunities, some interesting synergies emerging over there. So Gina, you've had your hand raised already for a little while. I want to make sure that I give you the space to ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. First, I'd like to say hi to Chris. It's so nice to see you here. Also, it's nice to meet Rafael and Marcelo, because I've heard so many things about you, good things, all of them. But I hadn't had the pleasure to meet you here, at least virtually. I can now I can know your faces. So my question goes relates to a thing that in Latin America we have so many interesting problems which relate to application in sometimes not so much into developing novel methodological approach with a supermodel. No, the impact is more related sometimes with the application. But since we are in the academia, we are interested in many things. As Chris said, we like a lot of things compete for the same time. So yeah, we do want to have an impact, but we also need to publish. And sometimes if we think about publication, then we try to, develop a really nice model. Depending on the type of field in which we are, then we are more thinking about that, the analytical model. And then if you don't have that, if you are trying to aim at certain journals, then it's more difficult to actually, get your publication. So, and mostly also, if we think about what Marcelo said, that we rely on our students, and sometimes we do not have that many students. So we need to strategically select which projects to undergo in order to have the impact and the publication. So my question is, how has been your experience in this matter? Because I can see that your topic is really, it has a really important impact, but more like towards the application. So I'm curious about how has been your experience in terms of that publication and application thing. What tips do you have in that regard?
Yeah. So I think you come to a very important point, Gina, which I think it's about this avenues for conducting more applied research in the field. So I pointed out that one of the potential advantages of being in Latin America is access to interesting problems where you can have impact. Okay, so I say there's a lot of low-hanging fruits in developing countries in doing this, right? But it's because typically it's under development. Maybe some simple solutions can create a lot of value. Now, if it's too simple, then the question comes in: would our academic community really appreciate it? And so that, I think, it's the right balance into it. But I think there are if you look at the trends in overall in the journals, there are coming more opportunities of conducting this type of research. In MSOM, the journal where I am a department editor, there's the Frontiers Initiative, which was somehow pointed into this direction, right? So things that probably wouldn't get published in a kind of a regular submission having sort of outlets where this can be appreciated, where you put more value into the application itself. The practice-oriented research competition also in MSOM also seeks to do this. You have prizes like the Edelman Prize, very prestigious award for a very long tradition of applications. And yes, you put more weight into the impact side. And I think this is something that is becoming more and more prevalent in the community. Okay, so it's become less risky to say so. You will find an outlet for this type of work. But you have to have a good balance, because these projects typically take a longer time. Like, you start working, you build the collaboration until you made the collaboration. You have to first show that you've created value, and probably at the end comes the paper, and that's a long time. And so managing well a portfolio where you have maybe a couple of these projects with others that are more regular research projects, I think it's important, especially as a junior faculty. Okay, that's my perspective.
No, I echo that. And actually, something that I typically do is when I want to explore a project that I'm not so sure about, what I do is I tend to put like master students to develop capstone projects or thesis in order to see if there is opportunities, like to deep dive on that. And then based on a set of criteria that I typically put as data availability and data reliability, the level of impact that this potential study will bring, the contribution, methodological contribution, and the level of effort, I just start, like segmenting this portfolio that actually Marcelo said, That way you will be able to have like a, like a broad variety of papers that you can take a, like think about and reflect on where you want to put them, in what type of home, what type of outlet, what type of journal, and Marcelo has done a very good job, like in hitting those high level, journals. So it's pretty clear that, and he mentioned it at the beginning. So you will need to invest like 5-6 years, like in order to be able like to publish there. But the question probably would be like, and how much the previous projects can help you in order to build that perspective, The way that I'm reflecting about it is like, if I'm able to identify areas of opportunity that are worthwhile studying, and each of these smaller papers that are not going to be at the best outlet possible are, like bringing me into this roadmap where I keep closing the gaps. And at the end, I'm not, let's say, cannibalizing what I want to publish at the end. That is very purposeful and very long impact, etc. So this can be kind of the, let's call it puzzle that you want to solve, right? But then you need to be strategic in putting all of these different pieces together so that at the end, the whole picture is going to come together, and you depend on the whole vision, like to make it work.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So actually, that brings me to another question that that came up while you were answering this question. So, how valued are top journal publications for OM groups in Latin America, considering that there's very limited time, that there's sometimes limited resources, and you have to invest a lot of time. Sometimes, with this teaching focus, perhaps, let's say the top journals are not the main target of researchers in Latin America. Marcelo, of course, you have a lot of experience publishing in this journal. So could you tell us a little bit about how universities in the region perceive these top journals, and what you see as potential opportunities to kind of develop that appetite to publish in these top journals?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned at the beginning, the first question was, how do you create what makes the difference between the top groups and the not so top groups? I think it's this, right? It's about, doing the right balance in doing, good research, good quality research, with the other responsibilities that we have, which I also mentioned were very important, especially on the teaching side. It's tricky, right? So what happens many times, what I'm seeing is that, first of all, you have to have trust, right? In the sense, okay, these are the top journals that we want to push. We want to have more publications in those journals, but not everybody is clear about which are these top journals. And so then what do? You start counting papers, and I've seen this has been a huge problem in evaluating research productivity is about counting the papers. I don't like that approach. I think you have to understand, what are these papers, both in terms of where they're published, but not only that, also know what's the impact that they have. So there's different ways in which you should measure the impact of research. And it's definitely not counting papers. I discussed with some of my colleagues, maybe we should count the pages of the papers. Maybe that would be a better approach, right? How many pages did you write? Did you publish? Why not, right? Why counting papers and not pages? It's equally valid in those terms. So it requires work. Evaluating the quality of research requires reading the papers, evaluating their impact, and there's multiple dimensions of this. One of them is sort of the prestige, how prestigious the journals are, but also considering these other aspects. And going beyond, though, if you look in our community, we're also giving awards for different types of research. And we have several awards for more technical contributions, but also awards that value the impact and practical impact of the work. So those should also be part of how you evaluate research productivity, in my opinion. And I think we are moving in the right direction to do that, to have a more realistic evaluation of research. And I think we should be thinking in those terms also in Latin America, right? Not just counting papers or looking at the ranking of the paper, but considering this with multiple dimensions.
So in order to wrap up the session, I'll ask the final question, hopefully to end up on a good note. So the question is, what advice would you give to early career researchers who are currently in Latin America and who want to make their mark globally?
This for me or for Chris?
Maybe Chris can.
It can be for both. So I will try to go to the point. So, well, based on my own experience, the one that I mentioned to you about my personal life, I would dare to say that something that sometimes I lack in the young researchers is that they are not getting their hands dirty. They are not getting their hands dirty. So I would dare to say, like, they need to build bottom-up and modular approaches that actually land in the reality. They really need to have the experience to go outside there and learn from the problem, and then apply the academic rigor that they are trained on, that is methodologically relevant and sound. They also need to learn how to, and I'm looking at this on my own self, like several years ago, about the power of joining forces with others. You need to develop your networking, you need to know how to connect with other people. And actually, you develop your own group, it's not only relying and delegating on your own network, but actually you need to develop your research network. You need to be open, you need to learn, you need to be humble, and actually explore common interests, So approach mentors, approach people humbly, and, be passionate about what you're going to be doing and have a clear strategy, as mentioned by Marcelo, on what is the type of research outlet that you have in mind. So, Marcelo, I don't know, what are your thoughts there?
Thank you, Chris. Well, I actually agree a lot on what the points you made. Just a kind of a quick bullet point summary. I think if you want to use the advantage of being in a developing country, one of the advantages is, as Gina mentioned, there's tons of problems to solve with great impact. And it doesn't require really a lot of sophistication to make that impact. But people in the community appreciate that impact. So if you can try to get handle of one of those problems, that's something you should try to do early in your career. That requires finding good collaborators, as we said before. Finding the right people to work with that believe in these collaborations, it's very important. Try to get data. Okay, so we are a community that tends to be has a strong focus on analytical modeling, but this is changing. And so trying to complement our analytical modeling with real data is important. So I would also push you on that direction. Try to get data, try to get it early on. And once you have these things, try to find good international collaborators. If you have good problems, if you have data, and if you can make changes to have impact, people in the world will love to work with you. And that's your selling point, to find good collaborators in the international network. And I've been doing that lately. And if you find good problems, you will have a line of people that want to work with you. And I think that's one way of taking advantage of what we have in developing countries.
Thank you so much, Marcelo, for mentioning that. Actually, this is exactly the goal of this webinar. The goal of this webinar is to connect people in developing countries and people in more industrialized countries, so that we can collaborate with each other. We can learn about the problems that exist, for example, in India or in Taiwan. And if we can do something together, so that together we can work on more impactful questions.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll be closing the session. We are finishing a couple of minutes late, but given that the focus is Latin America, I think this is okay. So
Yeah.
This is on time.
This is on time, right?
You have time. You have time.
Early. So thank you so much, Chris and Marcelo, for all these insights. I think this has been a wonderful session, and I very much appreciate all your advice.
Thank you for the invitation, and give us the link to the recorded sessions.
Sure.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
And
so now we have a break, right?
yes, I'm going to stop this one, and